actually coming into our newsroom right now. This is big. The Associated Press is reporting Las Vegas police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder in the 1996 shooting of rapper Tupac Shakur. Tupac was shot and killed on September 7th, 1996 in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. He was 25 when he passed. We're going to get more information. Big story as we get that information.
So it looks as if the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has some breaking news as they detail the investigation, the fact that they actually made an arrest in the case of the murder of Tupac Shakur. So without any further ado, we will jump right into the press conference. I'll pause it every few here and there to offer my perspective as a former police officer, especially seeing as how this is my city, Las Vegas, my former police agency, LVMPD, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. So we'll jump into this press conference and we'll take it from there. I'll chime in, as I said, when I believe that there's something worth talking about. So let's roll.
By my LVMPD criminal apprehension team. And this investigation started on the night of September 7th, 1996. It is far from over. It has taken countless hours, really decades, of work by the men and women of our homicide section to get to where we are today. Several of those detectives here with us include Detective Cliff Mogg, the lead detective on this case.
Can you believe that it's been dang near, well, it's been like 27 years since Tupac was murdered? I mean, that's pretty crazy. I mean, I know it's been a long time because, yeah, you're going back to 96 when when our daughter was, before she was even born. And it's just crazy to think that it's been that long since the murder of Tupac, murder of Biggie. It's pretty wild.
Case. He is now retired. Well, I know there's been many people who did not believe that the murder of Tupac Shakur was important to this police department. I'm here to tell you that was simply not the case. It was not the case back then, and it is not the case today. Our goal at LVMPD has always been to hold those accountable and responsible for Tupac's violent murder accountable.
Let me ask y'all this. How many of y'all actually thought that they would ever come to the point to where they found out who actually killed him? I never thought they would. I never thought that they'd be able to come to a conclusion in the investigation. Now they still have a case to prove and all that, but I thought this was just something that would just never be found out. Those are just my personal thoughts. But let me know what you think.
Just like we do for every homicide victim in our city, every single victim, every life that is lost is important and remains a priority to this police department. As we methodically built this case to move forward with an arrest, it was also important that at the same time, we're building towards a successful prosecution. We work closely with our esteemed district attorney, Steve Wolfson, in his office to ensure that is going to happen. Mr. Davis's own words reinvigorated our case in 2018. I'm going to give you some of those details, and I'm going to introduce to you our homicide lieutenant, Jason Johansson, and he will provide you many of the details on how we got here today.
Thank you, Sheriff, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. My name is Jason Johansson, and I'm the homicide lieutenant with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And my goal here today is to walk you through our investigation and what led us to the indictment of Dwayne Davis, also known as Keefy D, for the murder of Tupac Shakur. This case has been reviewed by our homicide team and homicide detectives for over 2.5 decades. And ultimately, our persistence in this investigation has paid off. Let me walk you through a timeline of events that as we know them right now. Prior to September 7th of 1996, as we all know, Tupac Shakur was an artist who was signed with Death Row Records. And that Death Row Records and its CEO, Marion Suge Knight, were closely affiliated with the Mob Piru criminal street gangs, and that they had an ongoing feud with the Southside Compton Crips. Dwayne Davis was the leader and shot caller of the Southside Compton Crips.
So Mob Piru, for those who are a bit uninformed, are a blood sect gang. And I'm pretty sure they're based out of LA. Don't quote me on that, but I would assume that they're based out of Los Angeles.
And both of these gangs operated out of the Southern California area of Compton. On the night of September 7th of 1996, Tupac Shakur, along with Suge Knight and members of their entourage, which include members of Mob Piru, came to Vegas to attend the Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Members of the Southside Compton Crips, which included Dwayne Davis, along with his nephew Orlando Anderson, were also in attendance at the same event. As both were leaving the fight, members of Death Row Records spotted Orlando Anderson near an elevator bank inside the MGM. And at that time, they began to kick and punch him near that elevator bank. I will now show you hotel security footage, as many of you've already seen, related to this incident. And on this incident, you will see Tupac Shakur was wearing the along with Marion Suge Knight, who's a large man in a brown suit, punching.
All right, I'm gonna move forward, y'all, because I do not want YouTube blocking this video here, because that's what they'll do. So I'm gonna move forward. I don't want to show the fighting because, man, it's trust me, it's a struggle dealing with YouTube. Now they're running out after they finish the beatdown.
Little did anyone know that it is this incident right here that would ultimately lead Shakur. Following this incident, Tupac and Suge Knight both left the MGM to make their way to a post-fight party, which was to occur at a local nightclub. At the same time, word had spread amongst members of the Southside Compton Crips of what had occurred inside the MGM. And then that's when Dwayne Davis began to devise a plan to obtain a firearm and retaliate against Suge Knight and Mr. Shakur for what occurred inside the hotel against Mr. Anderson. After Davis obtained a gun, he entered into a white Cadillac along with Terrence Brown, DeAndre Smith, and Orlando Anderson. Based on our investigation, this is where we know they were seated.
Now just look at that. 3 of the 4 who were associated with this event, with Tupac's murder, 3 out of the 4 are all dead. I mean, that definitely demonstrates the reality of living by the sword and dying by the sword. They lived that thug life, that thug gangster lifestyle, and 3 out of the 4 are all gone. Let's proceed here.
At some point in time, as they were in the white Cadillac, Mr. Davis took the gun that he had obtained and provided it to the passengers in the rear seat of the vehicle. As they were driving west on Flamingo Road near Koval, they located the BMW, which was driven by Suge Knight, and in the passenger seat was Tupac Shakur. And as they turned around, they pulled up near the passenger side of that vehicle and immediately began shooting at Mr. Knight and Mr. Shakur. Following that shooting, the white Cadillac fled the area southbound on Koval. And after officers arrived on scene, Tupac was later transported to the University Medical Center, where he was treated medically and died approximately 6 days later.
Hey, brother Joey, I do too, man. The dude has some good music, man. But unfortunately, he lived that life, and that life, unfortunately, has a short span. You out there thugging and gang banging and all that kind of stuff, it'll catch up to you. And what made it even worse was, dude was successful in the rap game. His music career was blowing up. He didn't have to live that life. But then again, look at who he was associated with. He was associated with Death Row Records, Suge Knight, and nothing good came out of death row. And look at where Suge Knight, look at where he's at now. He's still locked up for murder. So he's basically reaping what he sowed. What he sowed. Crazy. Good to hear from you, brother. Good to see you.
September 13th. My homicide section handled this investigation from its onset and for a short amount of time. And within a short amount of time, what we knew was that we were working a gang investigation where our victims, our witnesses, and our suspects were all from Southern California and not local to Las Vegas. Within the first few months of the investigation, our detectives knew most of the information I just briefed you on. However, we never had the necessary evidence to bring this case forward and present it for criminal charges. As time went on, this case had been reviewed multiple times by different investigators assigned to my section, but it wasn't until 2018 that this case was reinvigorated as additional information came to light related to this homicide. Specifically, Dwayne Davis's own admissions to his involvement in this homicide investigation that he provided to numerous different media outlets. In our section, we knew at this time that this was likely our last time to take a run at this case to successfully solve this case and bring forth a criminal charge.
So basically what he's saying is that Dwayne Davis, the guy who they took into custody, told on himself. I can recall a few years ago, there were multiple interviews in TV shows. I think in particularly, there was like one documentary, I think it was on USA Network. I can't recall 100%. But there was a mini documentary or a show that they did surrounding the murder of Tupac. So, and they're going back to 2018. So 5 years ago, this dude basically ratted on himself. He told on himself, and he was probably trying to brag, thinking that what he said wasn't that serious or that no one cared. But people get caught up time and time again. I'm telling you, I've had more people tell me stuff over the years when during my time as a CEO or a PO, corrections officer or police officer, people just can't help but run their mouths and try to share and try to brag and talk about the things that they've done, like there's how cool they are and the fact that they got away with this and got away with that. Especially when I worked in the jail as a CEO, you had a lot of people who would, after a while, they wouldn't look at you as an officer and they would open up and say all kinds of stuff. So I'm not shocked. You get a camera in front of somebody, some of these dudes, they just want the publicity. They want the attention. Before you know it, they're telling on themselves.
It was at that time that this case was assigned to Cliff Mogg, a detective within my homicide section. And over the last 5 years, my section worked closely hand in hand with the Clark County District Attorney's Office and followed a systematic investigative plan over the last 5 years. We've conducted countless interviews and corroborated numerous facts that were not only consistent with the crime scene on the night of the incident, but also corroborated and were consistent with the sequence of events that night. This ultimately led to us procuring a search warrant, which was executed at Mr. Davis's residence in Henderson, Nevada. And following the execution of that search warrant, in close coordination with the District Attorney's Office, this case was presented to the grand jury, which ultimately led to Davis being indicted on charges of murder.
I'm sure a dude thought 25, 27 years later that he was in the clear, that he was good. I'm sure he never thought that this day would come. Or that's what I would assume. He probably just got overconfident, thinking that he was untouchable. But nobody's untouchable. Unless you're a Democrat.
Before I hand it off to the District Attorney's Office, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Detective Mogg and all the other detectives that were not only assigned this case and reviewed this case, but all the other detectives from other agencies that assisted us in this investigation. They know who they are, and thank you very much for all the assistance you provided. It does not go unnoticed. And lastly, one of the most important things, in my opinion, is that we need to make this be a reminder that the charge of murder does not have a statute of limitations. This agency has been and is invested in solving our cold case homicides so that we can bring closure to those families and justice for those victims of homicide. And with that, I will turn it over to the Clark County District Attorney, Steve Wilson.
I think Vegas got a pretty good record of closing out homicide investigations, especially compared to other major cities.
Thank you, Lieutenant Johansson. I appreciate it. Good afternoon. I am the Las Vegas Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson. It has often been said, justice delayed is justice denied. It's a quote we hear often and for many, many years when talking about our legal system, but not in this case. Today, justice will be served in the murder of Tupac Shakur. I'd like to acknowledge the relentless work of the many Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detectives. We've mentioned Detective Cliff Maugg many times, and we can't mention his name enough. He is the detective, along with his colleagues, that brought this case here today to you. A Clark County grand jury has indicted Dwayne Keith Davis with 1 count of open murder with use of a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement. Davis will appear in court in the next few days or so for a hearing to determine his custody status and to set a jury trial date. This grand jury has been receiving evidence for months and has determined there is sufficient evidence to justify the filing of this criminal indictment. I've assigned 2 of my top prosecutors, Mark DiGiacomo and Banu Palal, to prosecute this case.
Man, I remember some
I
of
know a
them.
lot of people have been watching and waiting for this day. Tupac Shakur is a music legend, and for a long time, this community and worldwide have been wanting justice for Tupac. Today, we are taking that first step. Tupac was actually quoted as saying, "Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside while still alive. Never surrender." Well, we didn't surrender thanks to the great work of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department under the leadership of Sheriff Kevin McMahill, Lieutenant Johansson, retired Detective Cliff Maugg. I am proud to announce the return of this document. This is the indictment we've been waiting almost 3 decades for. It spells out the facts and circumstances and what justifies a Clark County grand jury in returning an indictment.
Hey, that's a good question there, Joey. I think though, and we're familiar with Wolfson here from our time when we were in field services. We were transporting inmates to and from the jail to the courthouse and wherever else they needed to go. And I think that's when he was an independent attorney. But I think from what I can recall, and I could be wrong, but I think that overall the guy's done a pretty decent job as DA. He's been the DA now for a while. Now, unless I'm missing a few situations, I think he's gone after some of these criminals pretty fiercely. So yeah, we'll have to see, man. Honestly, I think he might have come along before Soros really started bringing in these crazy district attorneys and judges across the country. Maybe I'm wrong. If anyone's familiar with that at all, like when George Soros started doing his thing, post it in the chat, or if you're watching this later, post it in the comments. But yeah, I don't know. It's we'll see how this case turns out. I think that'll be a good sign one way or another, possibly. But good question though, bro.
Justice will be served. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I just like to say that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Section year over year solves over 90% of the homicides that occur in our jurisdiction.
Wow.
You won't find that anywhere else in the United States. For those family members that have lost somebody that we haven't solved that case, I want you to know, just like in this case, we're not going to give up.
Let me just comment on that real quick. Now that's, excuse me. The fact that Metro solves 9 out of 10 of the homicides that occur here in our jurisdiction, I didn't know it was that good, honestly. I know that there's a different relationship that Metro has in general with the community. Now, we're not LA, we're not Chicago. I can guarantee you, New York City, we're not Atlanta. I guarantee you that as problematic as the relationships in the community can be here throughout history because of some bad events and bad situations, I think overall Vegas Metro does a pretty good job of addressing some of the issues and doing investigations and at least striving or trying to establish a relationship with the community. I can recall times where I was out there on the streets and we're investigating a shooting or a homicide, and I'm trying to get people in the community to give us some information to tell us what they know. And it was a struggle. And I think overall, compared to some cities I've lived in or some cities I'm familiar with, or in comparison, in hearing other police officers from other police jurisdictions talking, man, we had it pretty dang good here compared to a lot of cities across the nation. Like, look at Philly, the looting, look at LA, look at especially all these liberal cities. These people don't even know what justice is. They probably can't even spell justice. Once you open the door and you allow criminals, you lower or you raise the felony charge, the as far as how much you need to steal in order to be charged with the felony, man, you open the door to all this foolishness. And the fact that Metro didn't cave when it comes, I think to an extent they did lower or raise the bar of what a felony charge is. They did that to some extent. But in comparison to places like New York, like Portland, Oregon, various places in Minnesota, LA, Illinois, or Chicago in particularly, Philly, we're not dealing with anything close to the amount of problems, the issues that they're dealing with. Why? Because for the most part, Metro has remained, and not perfectly, trust me, I'm not saying perfectly, but overall, I think Metro has remained pretty tough on crime. When everybody across the country was losing their dang mind during the George Floyd and BLM riots, when people tried to set up a barricade on the Las Vegas Metropolitan, on the Strip here in Vegas, Metro shut that down. The local police department shut that down. There was no CHOP or Chaz or any of that crap going on. They're like, oh no. And then when an officer got shot in the back of his head, it was game over. It was, and the sheriff at the time, who I wasn't necessarily a big fan of, from what I hear from guys that were still on the department, they said that he was like, oh, take no prisoners. Like, it's you, they try to hurt one of ours. We're not playing around with these cats. And they let that be known. So Metro hasn't totally caved to the soft on crime mentality that's plagued most of our nation, which is why we see all the crap going on all over. Philly, bro, Joey, you nailed it, brother. Philly, I plan on doing a video most likely on Monday dealing with that situation in Philly. Just insanity. And you probably have more people upset at the police for trying to police harshly, trying to snatch up these knucklehead kids out there robbing and stealing and doing God knows what, than the fact that you have people looting and bringing the value down to these communities that are probably already at low value. And then they wonder why people don't want to come in there and do business in these communities. They don't want to come in there and do business in a lot of these Black communities, and they want to blame it on racism. But look at what we're dealing with. Look at what we're doing. Look at how we're tearing up our own communities. There's no justification for that. None whatsoever. Anytime I see those videos or think about it, it pisses me off. Disgusting.
I also say to you that as we begin, we're going to take a couple of questions. I want you to remember in your questioning that this investigation, subsequent arrest, and now indictment is only the beginning of the process. And we are committed and invested in ensuring a successful prosecution moving forward. So with that, we'll take any questions that might have.
Sheriff, excuse me, Sheriff, thank you. Have you been in touch with the Shakur family, anyone within here today? And if so, can you characterize what they told you?
The family has reached out to my office. I imagine also to Metro. We've been in communication with them. We understand that they are welcoming this news. They are pleased with this news, and they are certainly aware of the return of this indictment.
Do you anticipate them being at court for arraignment of Mr. Davis?
I don't think they'll be at the arraignment. I mean, that's a relatively short hearing.
Couple of
But I
minutes.
know that they'll be involved. I know that they'll want to be apprised of what goes on a frequent basis.
Now, just imagine that that's a family, one of your family members. There's one of your family members was killed, murdered decades ago, and now you have someone being arrested for it. I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster that they're going to be going through. You come to a degree of closure, most likely understanding that, or at least assuming that you'll probably never know who was responsible for, especially if it's the mom, or I don't even know if she's still alive or not. I can't recall. If anybody knows right offhand, let me know in the comments or in the chat. But if you're a family member and you had a loved one murdered, and it's 25, 27 years later, you get a call, or you see a news report and you find out that they have made an arrest in the murder of your brother, sister, child. I can only imagine what they're going through. My heart actually goes out to them, because that would have to be very tough to deal with.
Back.
Can you talk about any of the statements that he made that piqued your curiosity again or got you back into this case?
Jason, you want to answer that? We're not going to talk about any particular statements, but maybe he can address that one.
What I'll say is there's a lot that's going to come out when it comes time for trial, but he provides his own series of statements that are very consistent with the evidence that we have on the scene that we've obtained through our investigation. I'll leave it at that.
Can you identify anything that came from the raid, the service of the warrant in July that you didn't know before?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I'll say about the search warrant that we did in July, that we obtained information or evidence during that execution of that search warrant that corroborated information obtained through our investigation. And I'll leave it at that until we go to trial.
Go ahead.
Hello, Tiffany Ling with Channel 3. So I know that this was obviously a big move. Is there anyone else being looked at this point? I know a lot of people have passed away since this incident, but is anyone else being looked at as part of this investigation still?
So as I stated earlier, in this case, the only living suspect related to this investigation is Dwayne Davis. All other three suspects are deceased.
Wow.
Yes.
Thank you. Vanessa Murphy, Channel 8. Steve, can you talk about the murder charge if he is not the one believed to have pulled the trigger?
Yes, well, under Nevada law, and this is the law in most states in this country, you can be charged with a crime whether you're directly involved or whether you're an aider and abetter. We have an aiding and abetting statute, which provides that if you help somebody commit a crime, you can be equally as guilty. The best example is two guys that agree to commit a bank robbery. And one of them goes into the bank with a gun and actually commits the robbery. And the other guy is the getaway driver. Never went in the bank, but he assisted the guy that went in the bank. So he's equally guilty. That is one of the theories in this case as well.
I think laws like that, and I'm not sure how prevalent they are in other cities, especially some of your more major cities, but I think laws like that play a major role in acting as a form of a deterrent. If you know that you can be found guilty by association, there's probably a higher likelihood that you won't get involved in some foolishness. But then again, if you're young and ignorant and you just want to do something because you think you're untouchable, Lord only knows what you're liable to do, honestly.
Last question.
Do investigators believe that Davis was the only person behind the plan to kill Tupac,
course
or was
not.
he one of multiple people who came up with this plan?
I think the best way to characterize that is Dwayne Davis was the shot caller for this group of individuals that committed this crime, and he orchestrated the plan that was carried out to commit this crime.
And can you say how he obtained the gun or who he obtained it from?
We know that he obtained it from a close associate. That was a lot of the actual details of who specifically, all that come out at trial, but he obtained it from a close associate.
Thank you for coming.
Lieutenant,
Appreciate it.
can you say it, Mr. Davis, it says,
Man, I tell you what, this trial here is going to receive a ton of publicity because, again, this is something that took nearly 30 years for them to figure out. But what do you guys think, honestly? What are your thoughts on this? I see Veronica posted, and good to see you, Veronica. Thank you for the true news coming out, right? I mean, it's now I enjoyed Tupac's music, especially back in the day when I listened to that kind of music more often. I don't listen to a whole lot of hip hop. I listen to some of the older stuff, but I don't listen to any of the modern stuff nowadays. So I appreciated his level of the art form, his lyrical ability, and he talked about some controversial topics. But at the same time, I wasn't a huge fan. I admired some of his music and I enjoyed listening to him, but I wasn't the biggest fan as well because I knew the life he was living. And because every time you turn around, that guy was always in trouble. But it's good to see justice coming to light. It's good. Excuse me. Good to see justice prevail. I'm not saying he didn't make his bed, he didn't reap what he was sowing. I'm not saying that. I think largely what he did, how he lived his life, he did, unless he had made some major changes, this was the only way it would have ended ultimately. Some people just can't get away from that crazy lifestyle. And it's always blown my mind. I mean, you make all this money, probably had, I'm not sure if it was millions, but hundreds of thousands of dollars at the least. Because, you know, in the music game, people are always getting taken advantage of all the time. But I'm sure he had a good amount of money flow through his hands. He was making movies and doing different things. I'm sure he had a ton of money run through his hands, and he could have picked up and said, you know what, I'm not living this life. I'm out of here. But again, who was he associating with? Death Row Records, a Suge Knight, a notoriously bad reputation. Like I said earlier, dude's locked up to this day. I'm not sure if he'll ever get out, maybe. But if he does, he'll probably be an old man. But then again, we're talking California, if I'm not mistaken, where he's locked up at. God only knows what kind of laws that they have. Dude could be getting out in the next few years for all we know. But again, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that justice will be served in this? Do you think the guy's going to end up getting off? What are your thoughts? Comment down below. Comment in the chat if you're live, or comment in the comment section, or in the put your comments down below. I'd love to hear it, especially if you're viewing this video later. But it's pretty wild. I wanted to jump on and talk about this, and possibly I'm sure it's going to be a while before the trial jumps off, but I may actually jump in live when the trial is going, because I know it's just going to be such a hot topic and a lot of people are going to talk about it. And I'll share a little bit of my insight. Now, I wasn't a homicide guy. I don't have that expertise in that field, but with over 20 years in law enforcement, I think I might be able to offer a perspective that you may not hear from your local news agencies or from your average everyday commentator, people who might be commenting on this. But again, share your thoughts below. I'd love to know what you think. I'm not going to keep y'all here for a long period of time. Thanks, y'all, for dropping by, stopping in, checking out this show. If you appreciate content like this, I touch on a whole myriad of topics, a variety of topics, primarily from a biblical perspective, conservatively biblical perspective. So if you want content like this, Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Follow me. I think you'll appreciate it. I think you'll get a lot out of it. But as always, in the meantime, stay safe. God bless. And make sure you join the conversation. I'm out.